Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who I think agrees that it is a dark time for the Republic.
Tim Longo.
Tim Longo. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Good. You forgot to give me my keyword, so I was.
Yeah, but you got it.
On that one.
You knew exactly where it was.
The pacing was good. I could
tell. You'd get that one. Yeah.
I could
you
tell
could see where the ellipsis was.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were an ellipsis perceiver. It's the magic of theater.
Although in this case, the Republic doesn't exist. It's the Empire. The Republic.
No, I'm kind of like merging reality and fiction here.
Oh, got it. Okay, I don't really deal in reality, so
yes, that's true.
You're
that's
the
true.
one, keeping tabs on that. I'm living my La La Land.
That's probably good. On the West Coast, you can probably do that. I'm in like nuclear strike territory.
Oh, jeez. All right.
But yeah. Anyway, so here we are,
TIE Defenders,
talking about TIE Fighter. Yes.
Yeah, so we played in the next three campaigns, which are basically the only expansion pack that they did for the game. Ended up only being, I guess they were planning a second one that ended up being a part of the collector's edition, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Called Defender of the Empire, which is appropriately named because there's a theme of TIE Defender stuff in here. We played those three.
The Defender is actually turned into a key story element in these three.
Yeah, battles. I actually like that. That was kind of neat.
I did actually. That was probably my strongest feeling about the whole thing. Was like, oh, I like this. So the Defender is a thing that is rare. It's just been developed. There's not a lot of them, and that figures in. And it also kind of That's a great sort of licensing problem that you have when you work with the Star Wars licenses. How is it that we don't see these things in the film? Oh, well, these are very rare.
Yeah.
And there are not a lot of them yet, and maybe we would see it if there were a fourth Star Wars movie at the time, because then they'd be more available.
Yeah, and
I love that.
This was all considered part of extended universe stuff, so... that stuff never really made it very far, traditionally. And then Disney comes in and kind of wipes the slate clean as well. I don't know. Maybe they'll return someday, but I doubt it. But yeah, it was neat that
they will not return someday.
Yeah. You'd be surprised.
I would be very surprised if it comes to the TIE Defender. I will be. Shall we make a gentleman's bet? Mortimer?
Yeah, let's... Do I want to bet this? Yeah. What the hell? Let's do it.
Gentleman's bet.
Gentleman's bet. Okay. I guess that's
Do you not know Mortimer? And, of course, now I can't remember the other guy's name. Trading Places?
No. Oh, you mean from... Yeah, no.
From the movie, Trading Places.
Yeah.
A gentleman's bet, it's $1.
Okay. I did not know that, no. Was that Dan Aykroyd and... No,
yes.
Am I getting that wrong?
Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy were the two dudes, and then was it Don Amici? I think it was Don Amici, and it was that guy who looks like Ralph Bellamy. Oh yeah, Ralph Bellamy.
Stop. I would never have thought this would come up today, but anyway, TIE Defender, cool thread to tie through, no pun intended, each of these campaigns, and kind of act like you said, it's a rarity, so it gives it a lot of value when you're in it. You feel like a badass flying that thing. It's definitely the best ship, even with some new introductions they have in the last campaign, Tour of Duty, whatever they call it, and it becomes the plot and sort of this. Kind of a currency. I wrote a note down that's sort of like that, where it's becomes the thing that everyone's sort of fighting over, and then both sides end up having some of them. And so at one point, you have a secondary objective to actually take out the prototypes to avoid them getting into the wrong hands and all this sort of stuff. So it's pretty well done.
It becomes this battle for air superiority.
Yeah.
In effect, space superiority, I guess you'd say. But, to make sure that you've got the jump on the other guys because you've got the best ship. I mean, my favorite bits were, and we should kind of go over the overall arc, but my favorite bits were like, having a mission where we've only got one or two of these things left and you're flying one of them, and we're going to support you with TIE bombers and things like that, but, you got to get out there and disable these things so that we can capture them, so that we'll have more of them and we can, reverse engineer the technology or whatever the hell they're going to do. And everything surrounds sort of this one base where they've, I guess, come up with this technology because, in the Empire, there's no internet. You can't just, send all the details somewhere. I guess you need a special base somewhere. This is sort of pre-internet Star Wars. Star Wars is like, there was no information technology in the Star Wars galaxy far away and long ago. But yeah, I mean, it centers around, we've got to get this one base because they're the people who know how to build it. And, there's sort of a series of missions which are kind of surrounding it and taking it. And then there's a series of missions which are kind of like protecting it and protecting the prototypes that are there. And I did, from a story standpoint, really love that aspect of all of it, and of course, then it pays off kind of in a final battle, the final 10th battle or whatever it is that we were playing.
Well, and Zaarin's back, right? So
of course, yeah, and so is Thrawn.
He gets away the end of the main proper game, and he's the defector to the rebels, and so. And so you're basically chasing him, right? And in fact, we still don't get him by the end of this. But Thrawn comes back into the story more appropriately, and in the cinematics where Vader used to be the one talking to the Emperor, Thrawn is now the one talking to the Emperor, which is pretty interesting and cool, and a nice bold move for him. And then by the end, he actually gets promoted, and I believe he's also in the final campaign. That we'll play last, but
so I wonder why weren't we seeing more of Darth Vader? I mean, there's probably some fictional reason. I don't actually know. I mean, I loved, at the end of the sort of main set of missions or battles or whatever they were called, to be able to fly alongside Darth Vader. It makes sense, I guess, if we're going to talk to another admiral, that we're not going to also deal with Vader. There's sort of a division of power there or something like that. But I didn't know if there was a fictional reason. Like, you're the Star Wars guy. I know Star Wars a little bit, but you're the guy who knows how many fins are on the frickin' Zaarin shuttle and all that crap. So yeah, I mean, is there a reason why Vader's not here? Like, is he off doing something else, or is it just?
That's a good question. I mean, as we've already established, this is between. Well, actually, I don't know. I guess maybe they didn't establish it, but it seems like it's pretty close to the previous missions. So it's still got to be between Empire and Jedi.
Yeah. And I guess at the end of the sort of main game, they said Thrawn is going to chase Zaarin. So they did kind of have
they set that up.
A story continuity, that makes a little bit of sense, and it gives them time. Yeah, from a development standpoint and from a dealing with Lucas licensing standpoint, to say, okay, well, we have this other character who we don't need until Heir to the Empire or whatever, which is post Jedi, that we can send after this character, and if we don't tie this together quickly, then we don't have to tie up Vader, and it all kind of works with the expanded universe timeline, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that it was the case that Thrawn was a beloved character from the novels, and they wanted to throw him a bone and kind of strategically have him in there to kind of give him some more FaceTime talk, because this would have been obviously earlier than Heir to the Empire, and so in the timeline, so this was giving him more FaceTime, giving him some more history stuff. It probably, to be honest, in this era, in my memory of this era, like, licensing's role was not too direct, and it could have been as simple as Totally Games just liked Thrawn and they wanted to focus on him.
Yeah, that's true.
And they're like, hey, can we put him in? Sure, we don't really care. But
as long as you don't kill him, it's fine.
Yeah, and then the irony of our timing of this, I don't know if you saw this, I don't know why you would have. Of course, I would see this and you wouldn't, but Thrawn is making an appearance in the Rebels TV show. that is currently airing.
TV show, apparently.
Yeah, okay, yeah, figures. So the follow-up to the Clone Wars, and then
I gather there's a new Star Wars movie this week.
I won't spend too much time on this, but the Clone Wars show ended, right, and that took place between 3 and 4. And then they started Rebels up, which is leading into... Well, no, the Clone Wars took place during all of the prequels. But
right,
Rebels takes place...
Basically after Episode 1.
Yeah, 1, 2, and 3. During the Clone Wars, during 2 and 3. Okay. But Rebels started, and that's a new show that takes place before Episode 4. Kind of bridges the gap there. But it is considered canon. And it's one of the only things that's considered canon these days, especially TV or movies. But the fact that Thrawn is in the Rebel show means he is now officially back in the canon, which us geeks out there really was a nice little tidbit.
You geeks, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
yeah. Okay.
So then there's the first tour of duty is called Strategic Warfare, and that one, as you said, is kind of all about securing the factory where they're trying to replicate these things. Evacuating the plant, securing it, supplying the plant once you get it, capturing. The mag pulse weapons come back into play that you see at the end of the.
Because they're kind of like they're like a torpedo version of an ion cannon, basically.
Yeah,
it's like to take out a capital ship with ion cannons would be very difficult, and so instead we give you this heavy torpedo that does essentially the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and so, and then that one culminates in this. The mission's called Trapped, but I'm kind of forgetting why it's called Trapped. It's because the interdictors are introduced. Right? That's the one with the interdictor that you have to blow up that prevents ships from hyperspacing, which, by the way, becomes a core mechanic of XVT in the next game. Interdictors are like a really big deal, and it's a good thing because it was a multiplayer game and it allowed people to prevent it. The mission designer was able to prevent people from just hypering out for the hell of it. So little did they know this was an important thing for later. And then the second one was all about...
Whereas really, the hardcore multiplayer players probably just had a foot pedal that disconnected their internet.
Yeah, that's the real hyperspace.
Back in the day. We can talk about that. Well, we may not get to multiplayer kind of concerns, but yeah, that was a thing.
Yeah.
Still a thing, actually, for, the first game or two in the series you work on today, for that matter, so...
Yeah, that's true. Disconnects. And then the second tour was all about the tech getting into the hands of pirates. They kind of introduced this two factions of pirates that you're kind of dealing with to prevent that.
The Nami and the Nami and somebody else.
Yeah. I can't.
Anyway, pirates.
Two pirates.
Nami and the Blackbeards.
The Reniki.
Of course.
The Reniki, right? I think that's how they pronounce it.
Did they they just pull letters out of a Scrabble bag for this stuff?
I do remember naming in these games because they needed so many names of things because they had so many fighters. Was always a fun, hilarious journey. And then the final one was New Threats, and that was Thrawn kind of going on the full offensive. Probably my favorite mission so far in any of the missions we've played up to this date. Ransom, which I thought was the first one, which was super clever with the whole. They've taken a scientist ransom, I think, and you have to rendezvous with the ship, and then they give this verbal signal to unleash once they transfer, and there's kind of an ambush.
Full speed to Killimaar.
Yeah, so that was such a good moment.
It is a good moment. I mean, the first time.
Well, yeah, of course, the first time. We'll get to that in a second. But just as far as like having some of that espionage, like it was the first mission, and we've played I don't know how many missions, including the primary game, where you actually there's a lot of intrigue and espionage kind of themed throughout all of the the game in the story, but you don't really see a lot of it in the mission design.
Right. And in this case, it definitely bleeds through. Yeah,
and this one's actually literally like there's this cloak and dagger kind of feel, and you're escorting the ship, and you're the only...
And you feel like an Empire bastard
Yeah,
for that matter.
you're double crossing.
I'm totally a dick.
And
I'm gonna wait until we got what we want, and then I'm gonna just go ahead and go house on these guys.
And there's a voice line. The enemy actually says you Imperial bastards or something like that.
Yeah.
But you're hovering. You're the escort fighter, so you're alone. So there's this moment where you have to wait for them to come in, and it was just kind of cool. But yeah,
it's good because it entrusts both you as kind of this pilot who's made it this far. You're like the decorated war hero, and you're the best. You're the Red Baron, really. When you come down to it, like you're the guy, And I mean, I watched The Great Waldo Pepper. I don't know, a few weeks ago, which is an old Robert Redford movie. And there's that same sense of like, here's this World War I fighting ace that nobody beat, this German, and now he's in Hollywood doing like Howard Hughes style movies. And there's this moment of like Robert Redford's character wanting to go and fly against that guy, and they end up really flying. Like, I mean, they don't have the full technology, but they're actually fighting, and they're trying to film it. And it's like that of like, you're that guy. You're the best. But you've been around a while now, and it's like, as a person playing 10 of these battles so far, you sort of get to the feeling of like, I'm getting too old for this shit, Yeah. Yeah, to borrow from another Lucas franchise. So.
Yeah, and then it culminates in an introduction to Thrawn has as you said, air superiority, and develops a new missile boat, which is an iteration of the gunboat. It holds 22 banks of 20 missiles, which is a lot, and constantly replenishing missiles is kind of one of the biggest pains in the butts of this whole thing. But if you choose to do it. And so this is, it's a cool power fantasy at that point, and your ultimate goal of that final tour of duty is to blow up the final TIE Defender factory that the enemy had to, essentially take their tech away from them, and that's where we leave. Zaarin gets away still, I think, and I think that's the focus of the next three. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I question Thrawn's strategy.
Yeah, it's pretty thin. Yeah,
there's a cutscene where he's like Zaarin's weakness is that he likes technology. When we get more technology, we'll totally beat him. Yeah. And you're like, that's not how that works. It's like, if his weakness is that he likes technology and you're liking technology to beat him, I'm feeling like Abbott and Costello here. Like, who's on first, guys? So that was kind of a weird thing. That was a note that I made. Like, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
Like, but that's fine. That's okay. That's sort of the Star Trek Wrath of Khan moment of like, our opponent betrays a certain two-dimensionality in thinking. It's like, okay, I'll wave my hands here. That's fine.
Yeah. Pretty hastily. Yeah. Not heavily scrutinized probably in the editing process of that stuff.
Well, and I get it. I mean, it's really just, let's give the player 20 seconds of video to motivate the next, several missions or whatever. So it's totally fine. It's just silly in retrospect. You're like, wow, that's the sort of thing that at the time, like in 1994, I've been like, oh, that's so badass. We're totally gonna, destroy him with our technology.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and he just over relies on that. It's like, I guess as an adult, I tend to look askance at those things a little bit. Not that I wasn't an adult in 1994.
Yeah. The one thing that you probably noticed it as well, but I feel like. And I think we're going to talk about it in the mission design as well. But I felt at least that they probably had certain lessons that they learned from the main game that they wanted to react to and put into the expansion pack in their mission design changes. And on the story side, did you notice that a lot of the descriptions, the narrated descriptions from your captain commander guy, were a lot longer and more elaborate, and the I didn't realize this until this playthrough, that in the briefing room where you have the briefing kind of screen, the big holo screen in front of you,
right? Sure, yeah.
You can click on him there.
Oh yeah.
I never did that, and
I've been
tells
doing
you
that on occasion. Yeah,
he tells you what ship you're flying and what you should be looking out for, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I couldn't be bothered, but I just didn't even know you could do that. But what I'm talking about is after you finish a mission, and then you get your how did we do, and then he narrates, and gives you more backstory. That's more elaborate than it was in the main game. So I feel like they kind of added.
I totally agree. And actually, if you click on those guys, if you've failed.
Yeah, they'll
also give you verbal feedback, which would have been just text originally, but in the collector's edition, it's voiced or whatever.
Well, verbal, but it's also like literally like hints. Like,
oh yeah,
okay,
it's like,
do this and then
make
do
sure
this,
to focus on these guys first. Yeah, and then once you've taken care of them, do this thing. It's like, oh, take out the A wings.
Yeah,
because they're nimble. But then there's going to be B wings coming in, and you definitely got to take care of those guys.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fire one.
Oh, it takes one to take out these guys. Yeah. Totally extensive hints, which are good if you failed. I mean, that's a good point at which to bring that stuff in. And it teaches the player, if they haven't learned already, here's the sort of damage capability of your craft versus what you're flying against, and it takes one of these to take out these. So you can, at that point, it becomes an abstract, intellectual puzzle like we've talked about before. Like, oh, do this because...
Yeah, these missions were very puzzly.
Yeah, more so than I think the first 7 battles.
Well, and I think as a response, too, like you can imagine people giving them... Now, before really the age of internet, right? So they're not getting like hate forums or something about this stuff.
Right, sure.
But, through playtesting or through the game shipping, back in those days, it's like word of mouth probably from friends and stuff. But it's like market research and such. But it's, it's like somebody, probably they got some consistent feedback of, I don't know what strategies to use when I fail, and so they're like, okay, well, one thing we could do within the structure and flow that we already have built, because we're not going to make a new UI for this, is we could give them more hint and kind of walk through type information and strategies in the debriefing if you fail,
Right.
And so I just wanted to call that out as an interesting kind of time capsule of an example of iteration over the course of 2 related, an expansion pack to a product over time. This probably came out, I don't know, I didn't look it up, but it's like 6 months, 8 months later or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah, it's not a long time after.
Yeah, maybe it was longer, but the point being is that they had time to reflect, right, and kind of think about things. And we do that more these days from a live service model mentality, but a lot of games don't often. DLC and things like that, but disc-based games, you don't get that opportunity all the time.
Yeah, all I can get really is 1995, just kind of in a quick search. So it was within a year.
Within a year, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it definitely rounds that stuff out. And I mean, the other thing that you have to keep in mind, I think, is at the time, a lot of the feedback, aside from people who called the hint lines or whatever, would have just been plainly in the
press.
In the press, yeah, which at the time was even more hobbyist than it is today.
And we hung on every breath, right?
Yeah,
because it was the only feedback we were getting. It was
the only feedback we got. Yeah, right. At the time, I mean, it was and I've mentioned Carmack's plan files in the past and fingering John Carmack, but that was a very unusual thing. I mean, that's why that kind of sticks out. It's like it was very unusual to be able to get that kind of direct.
Yeah.
Like when I want to know, there was no Twitter. When I want to know, I can actually run this command on a Unix machine and see what John Carmack says about stuff back in the early days of the net.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, the only way we had to do that was basically a bit. It was starting to become some internet stuff, but it was really just like news groups, and then the printed press, really. So it was
Well,
a long way
product
from where we
support.
are from now. And
Right.
product support.
Product
right,
support
yeah,
was like literally call the company, and LucasArts specifically had a big product support department for the time, especially because all the adventure games where people were getting stuck and wanting hints and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was. I mean, we had all kinds of people call the hint line at LucasArts, including Steven Spielberg. So
That's right. I
he
forgot
would
about
call. Yeah, he worked on, I guess, the Dig, right?
that. Yeah, that was the official. Yeah.
Right. That was his official thing, and he called Sean Clark to ask how to solve some puzzle. You could do that back then, I guess, if you're Steven Spielberg. Just call the guy who made your game.
Yeah.
I think Robin Williams did too, but we're a bit afield.
Yeah, and then the second category that it sounds like we both want to talk about when it comes to iteration is the mission design choices that they made from the first game. First game, admittedly, probably did have some maybe overly simple missions that they probably got knocked on, and some of them you could finish very quickly if you were good and you knew what you needed to do. But for me, and I'll let you speak because it sounds like I want to hear your stories. But for me, oh my God, so infuriating! Some of the basically they leaned heavily on a different type of mission design, which, well, there was some of this in the first part of the game too, but these were really, it was exacerbated by the way they did it this time. Linear time-based mission design based on world-based and scripted events that were outside of the player's control, i.e. a lot of escorting, protecting, and boarding missions where there was an entity in the world that you had no control over that was just going to take its sweet time going to do its thing.
Yeah, some assault transport is going to come in and board the ship that you disabled.
Oh, my God.
And you're just going to sit there doing
And it's
nothing.
the exact wrong way to elongate mission times, right? Like, there's no dynamicism to it. Like, these days we would dynamically throw encounters in there to fill the time, no matter how long the person took. If they're really good, so what? They're good. They're getting through it fast, and they're blowing more stuff up or whatever. But they
get a higher score in this game. Like, it would totally be fine.
Yeah, that's true. It would have even worked well. Yeah, but this linear time-based mission design, just linear scripting is just like, because there's nothing you can do.
Well,
and so literally, I would just put the headphones down and walk away and just wait, at times because I failed missions so many times. By the time I got to the right playthrough, I was good enough at the mission where I was just taking things out fast.
Right.
But it didn't make the mission go any faster. It's like they gave themselves, they probably got criticism, these missions are too short. Okay, we're going to make these missions longer by having this boarding operation take 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, there was easily a mission or two which took 22 or 25 minutes. Now, in one of those cases, this was the thing that really stuck in my craw. So in I think it was Battle 8. So you have to, at some point in one of the Battle 8 missions, so that's the first set. You have to go in and you have to disable some craft because they want to board them and get technology and blah, 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 blah.
Oh, boy.
Whatever. Yeah, and those take forever. Okay, here's what's worse. So the next mission is Corellian corvettes, I guess, which are sort of those long freighters or whatever.
Yeah, Corellian corvettes, yeah.
So those come in.
The Tantive 4 from the opening of Star Wars. Come on.
Thanks so much. And so I disable those, which is not an easy thing. A lot of shield management, like forward, aft, and thanks for the S key tip. So I managed to disable those, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay. Because in the previous mission there had been a bonus goal of if you disable all of these things, you get a bonus or whatever for the Empire stuff, blah, blah, blah. I think last time I said your overall score does the Empire order of the Empire thing. It's actually bonus goals and secondary goals are for the Empire secret order.
Yeah.
Versus primary goals are for your regular rank.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that was kind of a thing that I didn't clearly.
Oh,
explain.
you thought the points alone were how?
No, I just didn't. I understood that. I just didn't clarify. These points go to this thing, and these points go to that thing.
I see. Yeah.
Which, yeah. it's complicated. It's more complicated than we would ever do today. But anyway, it's like some points are better than others.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's weird.
Over designed.
And you can't see which points you got from which. Anyway, so in the very next mission, these Corellian corvettes come in. I disable all of them, and I sit there and I wait. I'm like, okay, any day now, these transports are going to come in. And I wait. I've killed everything. There's nothing. All the other primary goals are done, and I go and I look, and it's like, oh yeah, you got to destroy these things. And I'm like, seriously? Like the very previous mission was like disable these few things.
Yeah.
You know, and which were not easy to disable, not as hard as these corvettes. But I was like, I felt like I had been trained.
Yep.
To disable this type of
changing the rule sets on here.
And I felt like, okay, now I've done this thing that's hard. I get no bonus whatsoever, which would be fine if it was my own dime. Like I just thought I'd try that. But it was like literally, okay, now go destroy those things. So I went and had to go now plank away at them because I had no missiles left. I don't remember if there was a missile loader at that point. There might have been, but even so, it takes forever.
It would have taken forever, yeah.
Yeah, because they're these big, relatively big capital ships. They're just like, come on, guys. Like, one of the things you talked about last time was that probably, an individual mission designer was responsible for a battle, and I just wanted to throttle that individual mission designer.
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of like one of those core foundational things of like, don't change the rule set, especially back to back, right? You need to keep consistency so you're not confused, especially in a game that isn't great at always telling you what objectives mean,
especially those secondary ones.
Well, secondary ones, but even primary ones will just say XYZ needs to finish its mission.
Right, sure.
And survive. And it's like, well, what's its mission? Tell me
how long? What does that mean?
What that is. So there's a lot of
sometimes you'll fail and you'll be like, oh, I only failed because it only checked that this thing didn't succeed when these other conditions were met.
Yeah.
Which is the worst. It's like, I did these other 4 things, and the 5th thing I failed in minute 1, and I didn't notice.
Yeah.
And it didn't tell me until minute 15. So there were some definite,
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that is one thing that we did way better in Starfighter or Jedi Starfighter.
Yeah.
There was never dead time.
No, that's what
I can't remember any dead time.
That's my frustration.
I played them recently. Yeah,
right. That's my frustration with this very linear-based, time-based mission design, because it is. Yeah, it really. It's the. If we had a certain, I don't know, like say an escort mission in Starfighter or something like that, right? Which will be generally a linear time-based mission. You know when it's going to start and basically when it's going to end, and if you succeed. We would still pace it out appropriately, and we had different goals. This was more simulation based, right? And we were all about action and accessibility, and
right, sure. And we were on a different platform with a different controller, like totally different mindset,
more arcadey,
And our what was that? Was it Colony Wars? Was kind of closer to what we were trying to do, and
getting more arcadey. Yeah, that was a console based kind of Wing Commander kind of feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was pretty good.
And
then I don't know if it was.
But it's still like, ugh.
There was one of these Corvette missions that I got really confused on too, where the Corvettes I think were ours, so they were red, and they had maybe the TIE defenders on them. So we were supposed to. There were these cargo ships that were going to go dock with each of them, but then these pirates were trying to take one of them, and they actually could. And then the bugs that I found in this particular mission, I don't think these were bugs. I mean, I don't think this was supposed to happen. So I had failed that a few times. So at one of the playthroughs, I actually successfully killed the pirates before they took the one craft and bugged out with it. But all the VO and all of the stuff is built around them stealing it because it's really hard for them to not steal it. But I succeeded in stopping them, and so it borked the whole rest of the mission to the degree where I thought at one point, I don't know what I was doing, I was tired or whatever, I blew up one of my own ships. And because I thought maybe from the mission you're talking about that I was supposed to or something. But the mission was not scripted in such a way to account for that. So the cargo freighter that was supposed to dock with the one I blew up never did anything, but it didn't fail the mission. So I was sitting there waiting for that thing to hyper out because it didn't fail. So I was like, well, it didn't fail, so I guess I blew that up accidentally, but
it's okay.
It should be okay because it didn't fail me. But it just never, like, I was there for 20 minutes and it just didn't move. So I was like, oh, I just should start over. But anyway, I don't know. We're venting, of course, at this point, but it's interesting to see there's a bit of sort of old school design in there. And also, I'd say old school scripting where, it's that age-old problem of if they play the mission the way that it's intended to be played, everything's fine. But if you start messing and getting outside of the blind spots, it's going to break down really easily, and that doesn't fly anymore. Like, you got to bulletproof your stuff.
Right. Well, and I would say that was not even a thing that would have flown. I keep saying flying. That's at the time.
That's fair. It is interesting.
Pioneered the idea that an A bug was not just a crash.
Yeah.
Right. An A bug was anything that stopped your progress.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I mean, I do feel like this was an area where it was kind of a gray area because it was at this point, an external developer. So it's not kind of. But at the same time, I can imagine those totally kick-ass QA guys who just were like awesome at this game and never had these problems. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of comes down to a little bit under the hood kind of concepts. And I don't know if Reed's listening; he's probably yelling at the at the iPad right now. We did, you guys, bastards! I
have his review of the original TIE Fighter here, so I'm willing to pull that out and quote from it liberally if I must.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah, he's a fan. But what I was going to say is, for those, I don't know, this is maybe an obvious thing that a lot of people know, but maybe people don't. Test plans, concept of test plans, which obviously come from software development in general, that was a critical thing that LucasArts always did a really good job at. I remember being on test plans for XVT as well, where, those things would take you weeks to accomplish. And this is really just a methodical list of things to check and try and to make sure you've done every scenario that anyone could ever do. And of course, we would just play and test the games casually and just kind of try a bunch of wacky stuff. But the test plans were that sort of safety net where it's like we at least thought of every permutation to test it out.
To give people a sense of what a test plan might look like. So take like your average first or third person action adventure game, like Dark Forces, say.
Uh-huh.
And now in every level, try to run through every point in every wall.
Yeah.
Get out of the world.
Shoot every wall.
Shoot every wall. Shoot every floor. Shoot every ceiling. I don't know if you could shoot the ceilings. I don't know if you could tilt that far. But shoot everything. Try to push through every possible, especially junction points where walls meet and things like that. That is kind of the level. I mean, it was really kind of an engineering discipline in the sense of like, here's a list. It's like an algorithm for how to try to break the game.
Well, yeah.
And if you can get stuck in a point, that's a problem. If et cetera, et cetera. I mean, just like, and for me, like in these days, and I've worked on big RPGs, where I've gone and said, you know what? We can actually put the player in nearly every possible point in the world and just test, and just like auto test.
These days we automate a lot of this stuff for sure. Yeah.
But back then we definitely did not.
No, it was manual. And, there's that age-old thing of oh man, I want to go be a game tester. It's, I'm playing games all day. It's going to be great. It is work. QA is an unsung discipline of game development.
It's hard work. And in fact, LucasArts had one of the best QA teams in the business, certainly through the time that we were there. Beyond that, I can't really say because I wasn't there. But I mean, they took it seriously. Mm-hmm. They trained people as they came in. It wasn't you're coming in to play games all day and maybe write up some thoughts. It was like, no, we're going to give you a task that this is your job.
Yeah.
You have to fly, the TIE Fighter, but with, different weapons for every mission. I don't know if you've done that.
Yeah, I've done it a little bit.
Okay, I haven't, but I can see that you can choose like different missile loadouts. And I go, I'm never going to do that. I see it, I'm like, that's not going to happen for me.
Well,
but there was a tester somewhere who had to do that.
Yeah.
And it was like, go through every mission playing just with the basic missiles or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's...
Or blow everything up without missiles, right? Just to make sure it works.
Yeah, just to make sure you can. Yeah. Or what happens if you blow up the capital ships and you're like, oh my God, to blow up the capital ships, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the sorts of things that were required. So,
and then add multiplayer onto that, and you get XVT.
Exactly. Right. Sure.
Oh,
gigantic nightmare. While we're talking, I mean, we're talking kind of engineering.
Yeah, you should
QA. We should talk about the tech stuff a little bit. This was 1994. Couple things came to mind of what, like, I don't have any special knowledge of how this engine was constructed, but I have some guesses based on kind of my own knowledge. Back in 1994, two things. All of this 3D would have been in software.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit just about the distinction between hardware and software when we say that, when we say, oh, the 3D's in hardware. What we mean is operations that you do frequently on a sort of general purpose CPU, the general purpose main computing unit in your computer, might take multiple instructions. So it's like, if I'm multiplying a matrix by a vector, so it's like to determine a rotation of a thing, that's 3 by 3 by 3 floating points, so it's a bunch of multiplies. When we say that's in hardware, what we mean is there are special instructions that make that happen in one instruction maybe, or in 3 instructions, as opposed to the 9 plus a bunch of additions, that would happen on a general purpose computer. So basically 3D hardware is like taking the things that you do frequently that take lots of instructions and just parallelizing them so that you can do a bunch of things all at once. When we talk about the number of teraflops that are in the latest PlayStation or whatever, what we're talking about is, well, in an ideal situation where that thing's running constantly and you don't have to think about getting data to it, it can do this much stuff. And it's really like a quarter of that it could do if it were general purpose, because it would only be doing those things one at a time. And normally it's doing them like 4 at a time. So that's one thing that I just kind of wanted to say. It's like the big 3D revolution was having special purpose hardware that was
GPUs.
GPUs that was doing all these things that you could do on a general purpose computer, just a regular run-of-the-mill CPU. It just took multiple instructions, so more time. So that's kind of thing one about sort of hardware acceleration and kind of the sort of big change in game development that happened just a couple of years after this. Really, 97 maybe is when it really started to get going.
So did the so that separation of those, and this is like me being Caveman Tim is a term I use at work when I don't understand tech stuff because I'm a dumb designer. And
so always.
So Caveman Tim asks the question of, so when those instructions were separated off to the GPU, did that allow the rendering of a polygon to have the smooth textures and because I remember in the same era when I got my first Voodoo card and I was playing Tomb Raider, and it was actually had already started in software. I got the Voodoo card, then was able to play it in hardware, and the difference is like mind melting, right?
Yes.
And
that's another thing that's going on. So that there's also specialized hardware to like map this memory to automatically do projection of like, I'm going to take this image and I'm going to take part of it and put it on this triangle. In the sort of,
which would have been too hard to do on the CPU.
Well, you were doing it in the TIE Fighter days. Like whenever you say it's too hard to do on the CPU, it's the same to do it on the CPU. It's just that there's no hardware to make it faster. So you're doing all these instructions. It might take you 4 times as long, or 12 times as long, or 32 times as long, whatever the number is. It's going to take you longer to do the same amount of work. And of course, you're only doing that on your main CPU while you're doing that, right? So the great, benefit of a GPU was that now you're going to go and say, oh, hey, GPU, go do these things. And you send it a bunch of data, and you maybe send it a little program, especially these days, shaders and things like that. Hey, go do this thing on this data, and I'm going to keep going and doing stuff over here. I'm going to keep doing AI work or audio work or, whatever. And then you're just going to spit stuff out to the screen, and at some point we're going to say, okay, we're both done, advance the frame. It's okay now to display the frame buffer or whatever. Yeah. So that's a very kind of techie sort of thing to say. But fundamentally, my Apple II, if it had all the memory in the world, could do everything that you could do on a PlayStation 4 or a Xbox One, fundamentally. It would just take 30 billion times as long because it had to do one instruction at a time.
Got it.
So that's the big difference. Now, the other main difference, between sort of what we do today and what they would have done then is that back then, everything would have been represented in what's called fixed point, which means, so these days we do everything in what's called floating point, which is to say, we say our basic units are, say, a meter. Everything is a meter, a multiple of meters. 1.5 means a meter and a half. Back then, they would not have said there was a point. There was no points in anything. There was no floating point in the number. Everything was a representation in terms of, say, centimeters, for example. And so then they had done all this math because back then not every computer had accelerated floating point operations, which is to say decimal multiplication, decimal addition, things like that. So back then they would have had to deal with, okay, well, we're just going to represent this TIE fighter, in terms of the space it takes in whole numbers. And when we rotate it, we're going to take it in terms of whole numbers. And when we sample into a texture to draw, bits on the wings and things like that, we're going to take whole numbers. So
it's
that was another thing to do.
It's not like 2 meters, it's 200
200 centimeters, exactly. Or whatever they picked.
Yeah.
I mean, there are benefits to doing that. Nobody does that anymore. But, the first Unreal Engine was this. So that goes as far as, 1998, 1999.
Yeah.
It was entirely still fixed point. The only reason you do that is for speed. Because back then, not every computer, a review I looked up for TIE Fighter lists, I played this on a 386-25. And I'm like, I don't even know, a 386 might have had a floating point processor unit.
But I mean,
might have, it might have not. I don't remember. And certainly, their min spec might not have had fast floating point operations. So that's what you see sort of in the progress technology-wise as far as, CPUs and GPUs. Is they get faster at doing floating point multiplication or addition or whatever. And they also have these GPUs on the side. And then the sort of final thing is that rasterization was all in software then too, which is actually taking a triangle and figuring out what actual lines on the screen to fill in with a texture, in memory. I mean, that's just, like I said, it's something you could do with the most basic computer ever. It just takes a long, long time, because the hardware access is very slow and whatever. So, or there might not be a lot of memory, whatever, what have you. These days, all that stuff is very, very fast. We upload that stuff into a graphical processing unit, and it does all that stuff for us, and it seems like magic, but it's really just fundamentally the same thing as if we had to type it out on one machine running only one core, one instruction at a time. It just kind of splits up the work, and that leads to its own sort of set of problems. But yeah, I mean, those are the sort of big technical
cool, interesting
innovations. Yeah.
So this I mean, from again, Caveman Tim's perspective, this looks like a simple engine to render and to work on, or I mean, it just from a
yes,
it's like
it has very limited sort of what we would call shader models these days, like what type of shading it does for lighting.
Yeah, and it's just
the big innovation moving to like the PS2 for us in particular was like we could do, and on the PC for like the first Voodoo cards and for your Tomb Raider example was like you could do TNL, transform and lighting, which was like rotating points in space or moving them in space and lighting them on the graphics chip.
Yeah.
And that offloaded all this work off of the CPU. That it didn't have to do anymore. So now your frame rate was much higher because your graphics chip probably could do that about 4 times as fast. So it meant something that used to take you on your CPU 5 out of 5 time now took 1 out of 5 times. So it was literally 4 times as fast, 5 times as fast.
Yeah.
Because all this work was going off to your graphics processor. And yeah, this engine is very, very simple. It's a DOS engine. So they're doing all this stuff on DOS. Because it goes back, Windows 3.1 even was probably up by now, but there was no DirectX, there was no like talking directly to graphics hardware, there was no graphics hardware, and it was only later that we had a DirectX 3 implementation of this engine, I think, with X-Wing Alliance. So a lot going on here in terms of like this being in that weird spot of like doing 3D before 3D was really fast, certainly before it was fast.
Yeah.
But at least faster than it was on, if they were doing a terrain-based engine like they did in sort of the World War II flight sims, which had very simple terrain.
Yes.
But it does. That's the thing that limits them in terms of their capital ships.
Yeah. You mentioned scale last time, and for whatever reason, I hadn't thought about it, and I feel like even back in the day when I'd play it, it didn't really even occur to me, and now it's kind of like I can't unsee it now that you mentioned it. It's like, man, this is just so far off, and I just accepted it back in the day because I just couldn't believe I'm flying a X-Wing or a TIE fighter to begin with, and they're so big compared to me. But yeah, they're not
nearly
so
big enough.
Yeah,
right, and a big problem with that is just like the amount of memory you have for pixel density. Like, to make something that's like 500 or 1,000 times as big as a TIE fighter and make it look as good as a TIE fighter, you need all that texture data. And there just wasn't, like, this thing shipped on 5 floppy disks originally. So you just couldn't possibly do that. Like, your TIE fighters basically had the most detail in the game because you're going to see those a lot. You're going to be close to them a lot. You're going to see your HUD overlay or whatever a lot. Those are the things you'll spend a lot of information on, space on the disks. And then you've got these big ships, and you're like, well, we're not going to make them that big because they look terrible. They're just totally washed out. They're basically, at that point, if they were that big, like you see them in the films, they would be basically big, flat, gray polygons.
Yeah.
Because it just wouldn't be possible to give them anywhere near the amount of pixel density that we get on the ships. So.
It's a good, interesting mini lesson in the sort of, constraint-based design, right? You have the constraints that you're given based on your technical constraints and engine constraints, and you adapt around it, basically knowing that that's what it is. And so there's essentially what this turns into is, as much as I have been, maybe you less so, but I've been talking about the simulation aspect of this being sort of one of my favorite parts, because there aren't a lot of Star Wars games that ever try to simulate the feeling. And I think the space battles, when you see 2 ships fighting in the distance and you see the lasers going through the air, it's pretty cool looking, right? You feel like you're really doing it. But when you have this scale limitation, it does kind of become a stylized, representation of it all, because you're like, yeah, that's not really. It looks pretty big when I look out there, but it's really when I get close to it, it's not. It's not.
Yeah, and the same thing is true of like the space dome around you.
Yeah.
Back then, in order to optimize, they draw very specifically like, okay, we'll draw the stars first, then we'll draw the planets on top of them, and then we're going to draw the big ships and then the small ships, and probably they're even going to do that. Like, there's a ton of optimization to figure out just to draw as little as you possibly can and to draw it in the right order.
Yeah.
Because even then, drawing a pixel twice was expensive, and these days, even when we were working, in the first couple of games we made, it was like, oh, what's the cost of overdraw? Oh, you can draw the screen 10 times over. And it was like, oh my God, that's a ton, right? And these days it's like, I don't even know. I mean, it's a lot. You just need to get into a AAA game and put an explosion or a fire or something like that next to your face, and you're like, oh, we're overdrawing the screen, dozens of times probably.
Yeah.
I want to read this bit from Reed.
Oh no.
To sort of give you a sense.
This is his review. This is his own review.
He literally wrote a review that he published in a magazine of some kind that was published online, and it says,
"We don't have his permission to read this, right?"
I do not, and in fact, he said, "I hoped nobody would ever find this."
That's awesome.
And I did, and I'm not going to say that you can also find everything he ever had to say about games when you look into sort of Google groups. I'm not going to say that because that would be wrong. Like, I wouldn't want people to search that out.
Oh, no.
Anyway, Reed, this is for you. He says, and this is in the graphics section. He has great titles. He has something called Imperial Entanglements, which is like bugs. He's great titling. Anyway, he says, at the highest level of gameplay graphics, you'll find Garou shading that delivers the best three-dimensional feel I've yet to see in an action game. Creeping around the edges of a Star Destroyer is a sight to behold, and watching an A-Wing run circles around you is as convincing as it is frustrating. So, he was just like you. He was totally, and he's like, the graphics throughout the game are gorgeous. So he is,
I remember, I mean, because XVT, I think, is when the hardware transition happened. And I hope that we're doing the...
It started in XVT, and then by X-Wing Alliance, they just went whole hog.
Right.
Because at that point, LucasArts had said, we're only making 3D accelerated games.
Yeah.
Which we've talked about before.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, that I remember, we were playing and testing the game on software, right? And then we all kind of made the migration over and got the PCs and everything at work, and it was just like... just blowing our... It's like VR today, right? It's like blowing our minds of this just game changer. And I hope as we're doing the podcast, we need to make sure that we're always talking about those transitions, because I don't know what another good example... Not on the same scale, but, materials coming into the equation.
Audio.
Shaders, audio. Oh, yeah, audio's a good one,
Audio's
actually.
a big one. I mean, I don't think we'll play anything that's sort of pre the audio revolution, but, like, having dedicated audio hardware...
Yeah.
Going from...
That's a biggie. That's a good one.
It's a huge one. Like, going from, like, the Apple II, even the Lisa and the first Macintoshes era, to, like, the 286 with a Sound Blaster. Like, night and freaking day.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not something we've talked about, because we haven't played something quite that old, but...
well, and then also, for me, just getting into... I remember getting my first 4-color video card.
Oh, man.
Back in the day, right?
Big deal.
And
those colors is all you'll ever need.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's hilarious, Reed. I mean, he put... My memory is, he and Darren they put their blood, sweat, and tears into this game.
Yeah, Darren Johnson.
Darren Johnson, yeah. So.
Yeah, Darren was also picking on Reed a little bit for this, so... We have a little email list that goes around when we talk about games that we've played recently, and this may have come up, and there may have been some teasing. So,
awesome.
All right. Well, normally we take a break at this point, but I'm going to say let's just push through because
we can push through.
We only have the one iTunes review this week, and it's from Finland. So thank you for our Finland listener for writing a review, because I really appreciate it. It's also extremely brief. But that's fine, because you're writing English despite that you speak Suomi all day. So it's a big deal. That's Finnish.
Is that
Suomi.
how? Okay.
That's what they call it.
That's what they call it. Okay.
Yeah, they don't call it Finnish. Because
that's got it.
Part of the illusion of doing a podcast is you can sound really smart.
Yeah.
And it's like the magic of theater. Tim.
You do a good job at sounding smart.
Yeah, the world's greatest authority right here. Anyway, Migohu writes, his subject is Great Development Retrospective. And his review is Cool Hosts and Topics. So there you go. There's more of the magic of podcasts, is that we fooled somebody into thinking we were cool.
Yeah, that's
magic.
Yeah, good thing. Yeah, we're not streaming.
Yeah, I know. Idle Thumbs has recently switched to streaming their podcast recording, and I'm like, I'm never doing that.
It's the trend now. Yeah, somebody asked me actually when I told them we were doing one. They're like, "Oh, are you going to start streaming?" And I was like, "I don't know.
I don't think so."
I can't believe
would have to do even more work.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm already a traditionalist for something that hasn't even been that old. Listening
people have been streaming their video streaming their recording for like 6 weeks. Tim, why aren't you? I'm a traditionalist.
Yeah. I download my podcasts and listen to them later.
Yeah,
like you what?
What? That's crazy talk. Yeah, no, I do like that. They don't actually. Idle Thumbs, I mentioned, they don't actually pay attention to like any of the chat because they just can't. It's like more than they can manage. But I know DLC does that, right?
Yeah,
that's
DLC
their thing.
does. Yeah, they do. They started streaming now on Twitch as well as and they did it live even before they were streaming. They would record it live, and so they had a different system there. But yeah, it's actually it's not too bad. I kind of when I was on there, I kept up on chat a little bit, but. It's fun, and there's kind of a novelty to the live aspect of it for the people who are listening. I don't know if we would get anybody.
Yeah, no, I mean
we're not on a consistent. That's the other thing they do is they're a consistent schedule.
Yeah,
right? They almost always are 11 o'clock one day.
Yeah. For me, I mean, I think the big thing is that I would have a hard time, A, with schedule, but B, like I've done some streaming of games. Yeah. Like I just don't get enough people.
Yeah,
and I usually just put it up to my YouTube channel and all that stuff. But so that people can comment post facto, and I'm fine with that. I'm like, when people are like, "I want to interview you," I'm like, "Good, send me email," because I'm not a give me time. I like it's good for me to have time to collect my thoughts. So anyway.
So next time
next time we're going to finish this thing.
Finishing, the last 3 tours of duty.
They better not be like 20 minutes a mission because
well, not only
only
that,
have so many hours in a freaking day.
I didn't mention it, but not only that, but I lost 20-minute missions multiple times.
Oh, I did too.
So there were a couple that I played. Oh, jeez, yeah.
There was one that I played like 4 times. And it would and it was one of those where it like failed, like one of the things we were complaining about. It failed early. It didn't tell me I failed. It was that something couldn't complete its whatever when these other things did.
Yeah.
And I'd get to that point and I'd go, mother. And then I just like at that point I was like, okay, well now I'm invincible. I'm just going to kill everything. I'm going to,
Yeah, no, I fully admit.
I just want to get past this thing. Because I've got to see these other ones.
I used the cheats a couple times for sure.
I don't think of them as cheats so much as podcast helpers.
Yeah, podcast sanity. So I mean there's 3 more tours of duty that there's the hunt for Zaarin takes place closer to Return of the Jedi, so there's some Endor stuff it looks like, which is cool. Bothans looks like they make an appearance. But the bad news is, unlike the last 3, which were 6 each, these are 7, 7, and 8 missions.
Oh my god!
Yeah. So, yep.
So start early. Start today.
I know that's my bad. So I gotta plan.
Oh no, it's my bad. I have no idea. That's a long time. Well, and if you don't get a chance to play through all this stuff, Rogue One is out this week.
Yeah, Rogue One. So that was our
tie-in for this whole thing.
For the thing.
And so go see that and see what battles look like when they're cinematic, and then come back and just kind of like put like a little screen over your eyes and like squint and say, "This is what they were going for."
Put the soundtrack on your podcast nearby or something, or on your iPod.
I will say that this game has captured pretty well the feeling of the space battles in the original trilogy. Pretty well. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. Despite our criticisms for and I think really this is coming down to mission design challenges, but the fantasy fulfillment for me is still retained all these years later, where there is just nothing like seeing a Star Destroyer out there or a calamari cruiser or whatever, and just like just flying toward it, figuring the strategy out, dogfighting the green and orange lasers, just flying through the air. I don't know. There's just nothing like it.
Well, and I will say, I appreciate you mentioning last time about the beam weapons.
Yeah. That helps,
a number of the more nimble TIE
when
fighters,
you're fighting defenders or
the defenders, those things are just Jesus.
Yeah,
those things zigzag so much, and just to have the ability to say no, just hold on, right? Just hold on for a second so I can shoot you. That was a nice thing. Actually, that was one thing I appreciated. And I didn't really bring it up, but I think that like that we added a zoom to the Starfighter games where you could zoom with one of the shoulders. I think you could zoom in.
Yeah, a little ADS.
Yeah, and I mean totally a first-person shooter borrow, but it was like it made no sense whatsoever that you'd be able to do this, but it helped do basically the same thing that you're trying to do with the beam weapon. So it was kind of nice. I know Darren was excited that when we added that, we're like, oh yeah, this changes and it feels really good. Separate issue when we broke it. We'll talk about that next time, maybe.
Oh, I don't remember what you're talking about.
Oh, you will.
Okay, you will
remember.
You will.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, okay, Yoda. All right. In the meantime, you can send us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. You can also review us on iTunes. We repeated Migo Who's,
4 magical words
from Finland. So thanks so much. Now I'm subscribed to Finland reviews. We haven't gotten any others while we've been recording, so I think we're good. I think I'm now reviewing Finland, Sweden, Germany, France, and anything that's in English. So, U.S., Great Britain, and probably a few countries in Africa. I don't even know at this point. I don't know what I'm subscribed to, but yeah, go ahead and review us on iTunes. And if we don't read it, send me an email through Dev Game Club, and I will track it down. In the meantime, also, you can find us on Twitter at Dev Game Club. I am at Brett_Duville, and he is...
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR.
The JR at the end. And that's just because you haven't gotten at Yoda yet.
I haven't gotten, no. Yeah, I haven't figured that one out.
On that, man. There's probably... I'm looking right now. Is there a Twitter Yoda?
Oh, my God. There's probably a billion of them.
There totally is. It's some rando.
And I got away without saying "aw geez" on this podcast. I'm not sure.
That is not true. You said it in the first 5 minutes.
No, are you serious?
I'm totally serious.
I was trying to be super aware of that.
Time to oh geez is less than 5 minutes this time.
Oh geez.
Less.
I just said it again.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
All right. In the meantime, I will salute you from the cockpit of my TIE fighter, and I will say full speed to Killimaar. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. People like that. Full speed to Killimaar stuff.
Full speed to Killimaar. Great.
Full speed to Killimaar, man.
Great. So you're about to double cross me is what you're saying.
Yes, of course.